Welcome to today's webinar. It's part one of a three-part series, Creating an ASP.NET Blog Engine with DevExpress, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In this webinar, learn how easy it is to create a small blog engine with ASP.NET WebForms and DevExpress ASP.NET controls. See how to set up a data model with XPO. You'll learn about the versatile DevExpress ORM tool, Express Persistent Objects, and its slick features like the Model Designer as we lay the foundation for our mini ASP.NET blog engine built with DevExpress ASP.NET controls. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Don Wibier.
Hi everybody, I'm glad you joined. Well, as you can see, I'm a technical evangelist at DevExpress, and I'm going to build a small blog tool. Before we start, we're going to set up a data model. So yeah, what's in the session? I'm gonna show how to set up the data model, and yeah, I do want to point out that this model is not ASP.NET specific, but you can also use it with different technologies like DevExtreme or WinForms or WPF. But in this case, we will focus on the ASP.NET. So there is one question for a couple of people: what is an ORM tool? An ORM tool is an object relational mapping tool, and the goal of it is that you can access your data by just using C# code in our case. You don't need to worry about SQL statements or other database specific scripts because that is being handled by the ORM tool. So what we also are going to do is we're going to just build some C# classes with the ORM modeling tool, and the tool will take care of the SQL being generated at runtime. And to give you an example of a non-ORM code fragment, I've set up a small portion of code which will do a select on a table named categories. And in this case, you can see that it will select a category ID and a category name. I will then open an SQL reader, and I will go with the reader through the results, and I will print it. Well, this can also be done with ORM code, and that will be shown on the second slide. That will be looking slightly different. As you can see, there is no SQL involved whatsoever, but I am using C# classes and C# objects. And as you can see, I will get an XP collection of XPO category objects, and the XP collection is a class which is implemented in persistent objects, and the XPO category is a class similar to what we will be creating in the ORM modeling tool. And yeah, persistent objects will take care of what SQL commands to execute, or maybe if you connect to Oracle, there is no SQL, so you need to execute some other scripts to get your data out of the database. And yeah, persistent objects is taking care of that for you. And yeah, that's a nice thing because you just don't need to worry about specific SQL statements. So let's get to Visual Studio and let's get started. I will first create an empty solution, and I will create a completely empty solution because I'm going to start from scratch. So I'm going for a blank solution, and I'm going to call it Express Me. So here's my empty solution. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an empty class library by picking a new project. Let's make sure I pick C#. Get the class library, and I'm going to call this one expressme.data. Well, as you might know, Visual Studio always adds like this empty class, which I don't need right now, so I'm just gonna delete it straight away. I'm gonna add a new item, and in this case I'm gonna add not an ORM persistent object, but I'm gonna scroll a bit down, because there you will find the DevExpress ORM data model wizard. I'm going to give this a proper name. And add it to my solution. And here the data modeler starts with a small wizard. In case you want to use persistent objects on an existing data model, you could map to an existing database. What this modeler will then do is it will analyze your database structure, and it will try to create all those persistent classes with the correct attributes on it, etc., etc. Well, you might imagine that the more complex your database scheme is, the more careful I would be with letting the tool generate persistent classes. You could also decide not to connect to a database, but in this case I will connect to a database, so I will create this one. And here is one of the very nice features of persistent objects. I can pick a provider, and here is a list with all databases that we support. And as you can see, it depends from an XML dataset to SQLite, Postgres, Oracle, MySQL, Firebird, Interbase, you name it, it's all in there. But we'll keep it easy, we'll go for the SQL Server. And in my situation, it is this server name, and I will name it this database, hit next, and I'm going to complete the wizard. So here is my modeler, and yeah, as you can see, it's completely empty, but we're going to put in some stuff. And the way that you can do it is you can drag in one of the XP objects. And what is a nice thing about persistent objects is that you can create a class hierarchy. So that means that you can define base classes and derive other classes from it, and they will still be persistent in the database. And you can specify a number of options how that should be handled. And I will set up one base class which will hold a number of fields. That's obviously the most convenient way for certain things. So I'm going to double click this one, and I'm going to call it XPO base item. I'm going to add a new field which is called ID, which will be my primary key. I will first add the fields here. I'm going to add a date time field whenever a new record is added to the database. This particular field should be updated. Same goes for the IP address of the person who added this particular item to the database. And I want to have his username as well. I'm going to add 3 of those fields for modification. So we have a bit of feedback who modified the data in the database. And I'm going to put in a mod user field. So if I now right click and go to properties, I can set some specific things like the field type and some other settings. Well, the ID should just be an integer field, so I'm going to make it an int32. Size is okay, and I'm going to make it an identity, which is true, and it will do the key also to true. I'm going to change this one to date time. This one I will leave to string, but I will make it a size of 50 characters. I would suggest if you use persistent objects, always specify a size at the column type string, because otherwise persistent objects will take a default size, which is in most cases just too small. So better make sure that you have the correct size specified. I'm going to do the same there. Alright, so I've got these things set up. You can also see that there is an index property here, or an index node. Yeah, because in a database you have indexes, and I would always suggest on production environments to think very clearly about setting indexes on specific fields or a number of fields in one index to improve performance of your production database. Specifically, Microsoft SQL Server has some issues if you are not setting the correct indexes. Yeah, then you will run into performance problems. So I'm going to set an index only on the add stamp, because I want to be able to sort my blog posts and some other stuff as well, depending on, I want to have the newest on top. So I know I will use this index. And I'm just going to put in the add stamp. As you can see, you can specify more fields to put in the index, but I will just keep this one simple, put it in there. Alright, so this is my base item. I'm now going to set up, I'm going to change one other thing here. Because this class also has a number of settings which are determining on how these objects should be stored in the database. And one of the items is the base class property. In this case, the model tool will automatically select an XP object, and in our situation that is a bit overkill. There are a number of base classes which can be used for your persistent objects, and this is perfectly described in the documentation of persistent objects, but I will just take a small, I'll add a small comment to it. I will pick the XP Lite object, and the reason for that is that the other base objects that you see, they all have a locking mechanism in them. And that means that if you are trying to edit one of those objects, persistent objects will check whether somebody else is already editing that as well. And if you might know, the transport layer of HTTP, and that's what we will be using on our web application, is stateless. So that means if you request your form to edit a record, that is being handled by the web server, and as soon as he has served that page to you, he will forget all about you. So in that request, if you try to lock that record, then you should also be able to unlock it. But that is just not the way how HTTP works. So for that reason, we don't need that locking mechanism. If we would create like a WinForms application or a WPF application, then it's like a different story, because that is not a stateless connection to the database, but it is like a continuous connection to the database. And in that case, you do want to have some locking mechanism, because if I am editing a record and my colleague is editing another record, the same record, yeah, then things might collapse, and you will get invalid data and stuff like that. So that's the reason why I picked the XP Lite object. And this means is if two people are editing the same record, then the first one who saves will be overridden by the second one. And in web applications, yeah, that's more or less the standard procedure, unless you do like really specific things and build in some code for that. But this is normally the standard way of locking or not locking. So this is also the reason that I picked the XP Lite object. Then I will also specify this base item will be non-persistent, because this is only for code maintenance and getting things compact and good. I don't want to see this base item in the database, so I'm going to make it non-persistent. And then in the other tables I will make it persistent and they will be stored. I'm going to add a second object, and this object will hold my posts. So this one is called XPO post. And this one should descend from the XPO base item. So I can right click this one and I'm going to select create inheritance. I'm going to pick the base item and hit OK. You can see in the model tool that there is like this nice arrow which indicates that there is inheritance. And if I click this object and I check the base class, you will see that it is now being set to the XPO base item. This also means that this class has all the fields which are specified in the XPO base item. So I only need to add a number of fields which are specific for this post. So I'm going to add them. It will have a title, it will have an active field, it will have an article, it will have a group, and I'm going to set the title to a size of 150. The active will be like a Boolean field, so I'm going to switch the column type to Boolean. The article will be a string field, but it would be like an unlimited size, because I can have like a small post and maybe next week I have like a bigger post. So what I can tell persistent objects is make this an unlimited field. And for people who have been working with, for instance, DBase 3 files, they know that you have like the table file and there is like a blob file associated with it, which will hold all those variable fields. And this is more or less the same in SQL Server, only they have done some performance on it, obviously. And also with other database systems, they will have like an unlimited variable field, and you can store any information in there. And in this situation, this is really nice. I will also add an index on the title field. And as you can see, I have specified a group field. And this is how we're gonna create a relationship between another table, which I'm gonna create right now. As you have heard, most databases are like relational database systems. So that means that you have table X and table Y, and they are related in some sort or shape by primary keys, foreign keys, etc. And this can also be done with persistent objects and the model tool. The way that you can do that is drag on another object, and I'm going to call this XPO group. I want my posts to be in groups, and one post can only be in one group, and one group can hold several posts. So we have like a one-to-many relationship. I'm going to make sure that I first create an inheritance with my base item. I'm going to add only one field, which is title. It's going to have a size of 50. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click this one and I'm going to say create a one-to-many relationship. Before I do that, I'm going to change this one to a specific column type. And as you can see, my custom created classes are also in here. So if I select this one, because this is a group and it should be of the type XPO group, I can now right click this one-to-many relationships, select my XPO post, hit OK, and the model tool will see there is a field of that specific XPO group, so it knows that I should create a relationship between the XPO group and the post. And you can also see that there is a 0 or many, and there is 1 on this side. If you noticed, what also happens is that in the collections node there is one added, because in C# code we will have this class XPO group, and it will have a collection with all the posts which are related in the database to this group. I don't like this name, so I'm going to change this name to just posts, and that will be that. So here you can see how to set up a one-to-many relationship. For people who are really familiar with databases, you will also have another type of relationship, and that is a many-to-many relationship. I'm going to set one of those up as well, and that is going to be done in a table called tags, because I want to be able to enter some tags, put some tags on some posts, and what that technically means is that one tag can have several posts, but one post can also have like several tags. And if you're familiar with these kind of relationships, then you will know that you will have like a table with posts, you will have a table with tags, and in between you will have like a cross table which will have unique ID combinations of posts and tags. And in SQL it's quite a bit of work to set that all up. Fortunately, with persistent objects it's set up really easy, and also persistent objects will create that cross table for you, but it's done all under the hood and you don't need to worry too much about it, so that's really nice. I'm gonna rename this table to XPO tag. I'm gonna create the inheritance. I'm going to give this one a field called name, and I'm going to give it a size of 50. Alright, now I'm going to set up the relationship with the XPO posts. So I right click this one, and I'm going to say create a many-to-many relationship. I'm going to select my post and hit OK. And here you can see a couple of things. You will see this relation, and you can also see that it on both sides it has like the 0 many indication. What you can also see is that in the collections node this XPO posts is being added. So the XPO tag class will have like a collection with posts, and the same goes for the post class. It will have also a collection with tags. I'm gonna just quickly rename them to tags and to posts like this. So this is another type of relationship which can be set up with the model tool. I'm gonna add one final table to this model, and then we have like the model for our block tool ready to go. And I'm gonna add a couple of smaller things in code, because I want to be able to add some images to my post. for instance, if I've been on holiday and I have some nice pictures made, I want to add them to my post, and I want my post to put in like an image gallery so I can view those pictures, and yeah, those pictures should be stored somewhere. I have decided to store them in a database, and in a production environment you should always consider, will I store that binary data in the database, or will I store those files separate on a file system? And yeah, you have to think about it, what's the best way. And I mean, these images will not be that big, and yeah, I think my blog will not get like millions, and I'll go for 100,000 of visitors, so no problem. So I'm going to put the images in the database. I'm going to call this table post attachment. I'm going to set up my inheritance again. And this table will have only a couple of fields. Add a new field called file name. If I'm going to upload a file through my web browser, at that point I know what the file name of the uploaded file is. So I'm going to store that file name also in the table, so I have some file name. Another thing what I'm going to store is the MIME type, and that's also a very important one, because afterwards it's quite difficult to determine from a binary array what the MIME type of that specific file is. But during upload you know what the MIME type is, so you better store it while you're updating the binary data as well, because yeah, that's the stage where you have it, and you'll probably need it somewhere. So MIME type is an important one when storing files in a database. I'm going to add another field, and that field will hold the binary data, so I'm going to call it data as well. And I'm going to change this one to a byte array. The MIME type, I will change it quickly to 50 characters. File name, well, I wouldn't go this far, but I'm going to put in 250 anyway. And I'm going to need a relationship between the post and the attachments, so I'm going to add another field called post, which will be of the type XPO post, which is here, where I now can say give me a one-to-many relationship. I'll pick the post attachment, and there we are. Well, my screen is a bit difficult to see, but I'll go for this. I'm going to only change this one and remove the XPO. The reason that I call all my classes, why I prefix them all with XPO, is just for me that I know in my code while I'm coding, oh, this is a persistent class, so I know that I can store it in a database, and maybe I've got some other classes as well which are not persistent. So this is obviously a choice that you can make yourself, and yeah, I prefer calling them XPO. I prefer not prefix them with XP, because that can interfere with some base classes of persistent objects itself. So for XPO it's like pretty clear that it is for XPO, and it's not interfering with any of the classes of persistent objects itself. Anyway, I've set up my data model, and this is what we are going to use. I'm going to save this model, so give it a sec, and I'm going to switch over to the Solution Explorer, because there are a couple of interesting things that I want to show you here. As you can see, the modeler has already included the correct references to DevExpress assemblies. It's put in a couple of Microsoft references as well. But what it has also done is it has already created a couple of files, which is, for instance, the XPO base item. And this is the implementation of my XPO base item, what you can see here. But you might notice that this class is quite small. In this case, it only has like a constructor, and it's got like an after constructor method which has been overridden. The reason for that is that this is a partial. So if this is a partial, there should be another part of this class, and that's correct because the model tool will create the designer file. And if you check this one out, here you will see that a lot of code is created for you. And before we had this model tool, you had to do this code by hand. And you can imagine that it's quite a bit of work, specifically if you have a large data model. And also, yeah, this is all flat C# code. So you really have to think about your model and how are you going to set it up, and etc., etc. And in this way, the designer code will have all the implementation of the fields. And you can see that this is being rendered as a date time field, and it will call a couple of base methods to make sure that if this value changes, that the proper events go off, etc., etc. And it's got like a number of attributes set on properties and on the class itself. Remember that I put this one in non-persistent mode. So this is what the modeler renders. And if I now go to the XPO tag class, you will see that this one is the same. And if I go to the designer one, it will be derived from my base item, and it will only have the extra property, which is name, and the relationship, which is set up with the posts. And it should be clear, it's also in comment mentioned above, that this file should not be touched by you in code. Because at the moment that you will add like a field in a modeler, this file is being overridden. So if you want to be adding some extra code in it, like some business logic or some other stuff, you should do that in the normal CS file, because this one will not be overridden by that model tool, and the designer one is. I am going to add some business logic on the base item. As you remember, I have in the model, I have these fields here, and I don't want to do that with any object that I will be saving to the database. This should be done automatically. And that's the nice thing of persistent objects. That can be done quite easy. So if I go back to this class, I can override a certain method. And if we check this, you can see that there is a number of methods which looks pretty interesting. And the one that I'm going to use is the onSaving. What happens is, if you are trying to save an object which has the onSaving method implemented, if you start going to save this object, the onSaving method will be executed first. And this is the place, if you want to do some validation, then you can do that here. And if the validation fails, you could like throw an exception or do something else, depending on your business logic. What you can also do, and that's what we're going to do, I'm going to set those add fields and those mod fields automatically. Before I can do that, I will just add one reference to this project, which is the system.web, because I'm going to need that one to get the IP address. you should be careful with this, because if you're going to use this library in another project which is not web related, then you need to find a way to get that IP address. But in this situation, it will be okay. So I'm going to paste in a bit of code here to save you all some time, because I'm not a really fast typer. So let me get it, and I'm going to explain what I'm going to do here. So this is the code I've just been pasted. Let me resolve the references. So it gets me a bit nervous, those little red lines. Yeah, this looks better. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check if this code is being executed while there is a HTTP context available. You should always check that in these kind of constructions, because it could be possible that you will start a background thread which will add an object like this, and in a background thread there is no HTTP context, so then it would fail. The same for the authenticated. Yeah, you should check up front if there is like a current principal, if the current principal has an identity, and yeah, you could put it in a try catch to make it a bit easier, but at runtime that does take more time than just to check these properties. So this, yeah, it looks like a bit more code, but this runs faster in the end, because an exception is time consuming for the runtime to get it resolved and do some stuff with it. Then there's another little thing, which is the stamp. I'm gonna request the stamp once, and I'm gonna use it for the mod and the add. And I'm gonna work with the UTC ones. That's obviously up to you what you want to use, but yeah, it would be nice that if my blog tool is running on a server which is based in the Netherlands, in my situation, then we will have UTC +1, I think. But if somebody in the United States is reading my blog post, yeah, he will be in a different time zone, and with the UTC one you could transform it for that specific user in the United States to his or her local time. So I've decided to store all those dates and times in UTC format. I'm gonna request the IP address, because that was also one thing that should be there. And I'm gonna request the current user. And in case that the user is not authenticated and there is a HTTP context, then I'm gonna use the anonymous ID, which is only available in a web application. Well, we are working with a web application, so we can store the anonymous ID. Then there is one other interesting thing, because I only want to update the add fields when I'm inserting a new object. And that can be asked to the persistent object session by calling this method, like, hey, am I a new object? If so, then I'm going to set these fields. Otherwise, I'm just going to skip that, but I'm going to set the mod fields anyway. So with this more or less fairly simple business logic, I've shown you how you can implement this in code. And obviously in C# you have much more control on validation, and you can check a number of things, and you can do whatever you like in C# to check if your data is okay. And yeah, you can implement it by overriding the onsaving. There is also an onsaved event, so that's after the object has been committed to the database. There is an ondeleting, etc., etc. So you can do all kind of sophisticated stuff in your C# code. There is one last thing that I would like to add, and there is some pretty good documentation about it, because we should also be able to make selections. And if you remember the slideshow that I just showed you, it will just do a select everything. But I mean, you should also be able to make like complex selections based on specific criteria. And persistent objects has some different ways on using that. And one of the ways it can be done by using the simplified criteria language, which is quite a logical language that you can use to specify which objects you want to load and which objects you want to modify, etc., etc. And to make that work, there is an embedded class in this base item, which is a fields class. And that fields class will have a couple of static properties, and I'm going to paste that in as well because they are just static and it saves some type work. And as you can see, these are just all the properties which are in the model tool, and they're of the type operand property. And I will show you in the next episode, when we're going to run a couple of selections, that these ones are quite easy to use, and that this is also saving you some time on selecting data from the database. I will also need to add it to the other classes, so I will add them by copy and pasting them really quick, but fortunately the other classes are fairly small. These only have like a number of fields. So I'm gonna add the fields class in there as well. And I'm gonna put them in this one as well. And I'm going to put them in this class as well. So this is one final step that I needed to make, and I have put it in the partial class, as you can see. So in case I will make changes to the model, then these changes are not being overwritten in any case. So that's a good thing. Let me see if this project is building. Yeah. Yeah, so this is basically the first webinar. I've set up a data model. Let me show the model again. Amanda, I'm not sure if there are like any questions.
Hey, Don.
Hi.
Your lovely team has answered every question that came in.
Oh, great. That is awesome. Okay. Well, in that case, this is the data model, and yeah, I hope you find it interesting. We will continue next week at the same time, and what we're going to discuss then is we're going to use this model, and we're going to put in some code, and we're going to set up the web application, and we are going to make a couple of smaller selections on this model. And in the third episode, we will bind it all together, and there you will see different ways of selecting data, updating data, etc., etc. And I'm going to show a small summary of what we have done so far. So what we have basically done is we have added a class library to an empty solution. We have added the data model wizard to that class library, and we have set up that model. And we've even put in a bit of business logic to that model. And we might put in some more business logic in the next week when we're putting in some more stuff anyway. So I hope you find it interesting so far, and that you will join me next week when we're going to use this model in our web application.
Awesome. Thanks, Don. We did have a question that came in from Tony. He says, I haven't used the DevExpress XPO models before. I mostly use the ADO.NET entity data models. Can you tell me what is the major difference?
Okay. Yeah. Well, we have these days the entity framework is of course also a very popular ORM, and the other modeling tool that you were mentioning as well. Yeah, the thing is that persistent objects is a bit more mature because it exists for quite some time already. And of course, the nice thing about persistent objects is that you can pick any database backend that you like. And that is one of the big advantages of persistent objects, because we have like the biggest support for most databases available. And then yeah, there is like the performance issue, because yeah, persistent objects is pretty performant. Also, the SQL that it's generating is pretty performant and rather optimized. And yeah, with the entity framework, you could run into some problems, specifically when you're querying large data sets. Then you will get some performance decrease. So, and obviously the DevExpress controls, they can connect to any data source whatsoever. So for the DevExpress ASP.NET controls, it doesn't matter if you're using persistent objects or entity framework or ADO.NET. The controls, so the visual controls, they can be bound to any data source. So that should not be a big deal, but I hope that answers your question.
Great. And then from Tim, will the ORM tool wizard generate industry standard classes and code?
I would say check that out, because obviously we are creating classes, and I'm not completely sure what you mean by industry standard. I mean, this persistent objects uses some approach, and it's got like a basic framework of classes and stuff, and yeah, you need to derive from our persistent objects classes. So yeah, I couldn't say if that's industry standards, but the only thing that I do know is that it can handle huge amounts of data when used properly. Yeah, so.
Okay. From Dave, can I use XPO to seed the initial database?
Yeah, you can do that, but there is obviously one thing to remember. Once you start using an ORM tool, in most cases, and also the same goes for persistent objects, you don't want to touch the database with an SQL command or something. So if you want to feed your database, what you should do is you create C# code, which will create classes or objects basically. And those objects are being stored in the database. So you, in your application start, you could run like some method which will insert a number of objects, and yeah, you can feed it. There are also tricks on getting a second data layer with to a different data source, which for instance is like an XML data source. So you can pump in your XML data into SQL Server or whatever.
Let's see. Jaime's asking, why doesn't XPO support SQL Server time fields?
That's a good question. Please send an email to support@devexpress.com. I can't answer that right now.
Okay. And let's see. From Fernando, could you provide more Can you provide more links to the theme illustration XPO object type?
Sorry, one more time?
Sorry, it's a little bit strangely worded. Can you provide more links to the theme illustration XPO type? Fernando, maybe we need some clarification.
Yeah, please, because I don't completely understand it.
Okay. In XPO, if I change the model after the databases have been created, will XPO migrate the data?
In some situations it does, in some situations it doesn't. And that is very well documented, but I can tell you it works pretty logical. For instance, if I have a table and you will add a field in your model, or you will add a field in your code as well, that doesn't make any difference. If you run your application again, what happens in the application start, the schema is being compared with the C# classes, and for instance, if there is a field added, then that field will be added to the database automatically. But if you comment out a field in C#, you might understand that XPO by design will not drop that field from the database. So it will leave that field in the database, though it will not use it anymore. But yeah, I mean, it can better be in the database because, yeah, it would be a waste if that field has been dropped and it was a mistake and the data has been gone. The same goes for the field sizes. If you change a field size afterwards, that will not be changed in the database unless it is a new field. So there are a number of ways that XPO is by design not doing those changes, and a number of situations where it does update your data model. Yeah.
And then just one more question. How can I integrate XPO with DevEx? Well, I don't know if this is one that you can answer. I'll just finish it though. How can I integrate XPO with DevExtreme Web and mobile? Do I need an additional tier-like service?
Well, there's a very nice thing with XPO, and we might do another webinar on that, but that will take a couple of weeks. We can create an OData service from this. We can create an OData service from this little class library that we have created. And what that basically means is that these persistent objects are available through OData. And with DevExtreme, you can use OData services to get your data and update your data. So yeah, you can use this persistent objects pretty nice with DevExtreme as well.
Great. All right, so that is all of the questions.
All right.
Awesome. All right, everybody. So thank you so much, Don. So like he mentioned, parts 2 and 3 of this series are up and open for registration at devexpress.com/webinars. Part 2 is next Tuesday, June 17th, and part 3 is Tuesday, June 24th. Both are at our regularly scheduled 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, we launched 14.1 last week. So if you missed any of our 14.1 webinars, they are all recorded and available online at devexpress.com/webinars. We have WinForms, reporting and dashboards, ASP.NET WebForms and MVC, and DevExtreme are all posted for you to watch at your own convenience. And that is it for this one. If you haven't already, please download and try 14.1 today. And again, thanks to Don. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.